if the participants lose their WebEx service, they can either join as a participant or call the toll-free number that is provided meeting announcement. And we thank Shelton Sullivan for helping facilitate our WebEx service today. He'll keep all the members and Council Reynolds microphones open during the meeting, and we'll turn to other participants' microphones and turn them on when they are called upon. He'll also control handing over screen sharing to the presenters. If members have questions or comments on an agenda item, please raise your hand in the video, or I may just have to ask you to I can't see everyone at once. I think we have a chat box too. So,
Madam Chair, your audio is cutting out a little bit, but
has he been able to sign on yet? Yes. See.
Yes. Good morning or good afternoon.
That will help. Chris, thank you. Chris Ventilaro is here. Pam, you're and Pam, panel speaker today.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here.
And then we have a Hello, Shelton. Can you hear me?
yes, you were cutting out some with the audio.
Okay.
But maybe it'll help with your video off, possibly.
Video is off.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. So let me call the meeting to order. Welcome to this meeting of the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission. My name is Marion Deerhake, Chairman of the committee, Water Quality Committee. You have already heard committee members in attendance today during our roll call, as well as our supporting staff today. We'll hear the March meeting minutes to approve. We have 2 action items and 2 information items. Additional Water Quality Committee action items before the EMC tomorrow are listed in section 3 of our agenda, simply for your information. We have not scheduled to discuss unless members wish to do so. It is important to note that this meeting will be conducted as our other EMC meetings, in that only EMC members and those called upon by the Water Quality Committee Chairman will be recognized to speak. This meeting is being recorded and minutes will be prepared for review and approval at the committee's next regularly scheduled July 2021 meeting. So I think for the purposes of a roll call, let the record show that we have John McAdams, Maggie Monist, Vice Chair Pat Harris, myself, Chairman Mybird, Council Reynolds, Director Smith, Chris Ventilaro, Pam Bean thus far. We welcome members who are sitting in on this committee meeting. I will say that when Commissioner Carter signs on, Shelton, if you can help me watch for him, because it's important that we have a quorum. I believe we do currently with 4 members out of 7. We've received notice from Commissioners Davis and Gillespie that they will not be attending today. I have Philip Reynolds has sent me a text that he is on as an attendee and wishes to be switched to become a panelist.
Madam Chair, this is Phil.
Yeah.
He got me straightened out just a few minutes ago.
Oh, great. Okay,
I
good.
believe Commissioner Carter is working on getting in now as well.
All right.
Okay.
So Council Reynolds, I think we do have a quorum. We have 4 of the 7 members who are currently on, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, good. Well, while Commissioner Carter's getting on, we'll go ahead and take care of our meeting minutes. We have the minutes before us for the month of March. I think Commissioner McAdams may have a few editorial comments. Commissioner McAdams, do you have anything you want to say?
Chairman Deerhake, thank you. There's really nothing substantial in there. I just caught a few things. There's a reference to the School of Government at the University of Chapel Hill. And I've lived in that town for 50 years and have not run across that university. And so I wonder if it's the University of North Carolina.
Thank you.
I guess I put my own editorial comment in and a reference to a section of the North Carolina Administrative Code. All the numbers and letters are there, but the title of that section is not. I am one who is always aided by putting in actually the title. So that's more of a suggestion than a catching of an error. And then just one other small thing, there's a reference to the EMC chair having thanked some of the people, and I imagine it's the WQC chair who thanks some of the presenters. And but that's it, and I've already transmitted these to the very capable Adrian Weaver, so I'm sure we're in good hands on these matters.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner McAdams. And if the other committees have no objections to those revisions, which we greatly appreciate, I'll accept a motion to approve as amended.
I move approval.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner McAdams. So I hear a second.
This is Pat Harris. I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Harris. Any other discussion about the minutes? If not, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Carter. We'll come back to him. Hopefully he'll be on in a moment. Commissioner Davis is absent. Commissioner Gillespie is not with us. Commissioner McAdams.
Aye.
Commissioner Manas.
Aye.
Commissioner Harris.
Aye.
And the chairman votes yes. We have a majority, and Chairman Myberg, you vote?
Well, actually, when you said the chairman, I was thinking you were referring to me, but I'll refrain on this one.
Okay, fine. The motion carries. Minutes are approved as amended. How is the audio sounding now? Is it still a bit spotty?
It's very clear to me.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds good.
I might turn the video on then, just to see if it will work and not interfere. Okay. So our first action item is a request to proceed to the EMC with amendments to 15A NCAC 02B.0211 for a site-specific Chlorophyll-a surface water quality standard for the High Rock Lake Reservoir. Presenting will be Chris Ventilaro with the Division of Water Resources Classification, Standards, and Rules Review Branch. Let me check real quick again. Any success with Commissioner Carter getting online? Shelton?
I did not see him on the attendee list and haven't gotten an email or messages.
Council Reynolds, had you heard from him, you said?
I was on the phone with him until just shortly before the meeting. He said he was working his way over to get on. He did mention that the issues that someone else had pointed out about foam today, so he may have been having problems. But I haven't heard since then.
Well, in the interest of time, I think we need to go ahead. Hopefully he can join us soon. And if we need to revisit anything once he gets on, we can. So,
Madam Chairman, this is Pat
Yes.
Harris. I may have missed this, but I didn't know if we needed to declare a known or conflict of interest. So I thought I'd just bring that point up.
so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yes. Let me get to that. Good to have a good vice chair. North Carolina General Statute 163A-59E mandates that there inquire as stores know of known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters before the EMC's Water Quality Committee. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of conflict, please say so at this time. Let the record show no one spoke. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Ventilaro, we're ready for your presentation.
All right, thanks so much, Chair Derrick. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to stop my video to save some bandwidth here, and I will share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see these. Okay, can everyone hear me and see my slides? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Well, again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Ventilaro, and I work with the Division of Water Resources in the Classification, Standards, and Rules Review branch. And today I'll present on amendments to OTB 0211 for our site-specific Chlorophyll-a surface water quality standard for the High Rock Lake Reservoir. Our action item today is that we are seeking, the division is seeking approval to proceed to the EMC for public notice and hearings on this proposed site-specific standard for Chlorophyll-a in High Rock Lake that will appear in 15A NCAC 02B 0211. The following items are attached as part of this action item. Attachment A are the proposed amendments to 15A NCAC 02B 0211. Attachment B is the division's overview of High Rock Lake Chlorophyll-a site-specific standard proposal and assessment methodology recommendation. And attachment C is the Nutrient Criteria Development Plan, otherwise referred to as the Ncdp, Scientific Advisory Council High Rock Lake Chlorophyll-a criteria recommendation. And I also want to mention that we also have an attachment D, which is the Office of State Budget and Management approved regulatory impact analysis for this rulemaking. It does not appear in the slide because we received the OSBM approval after the submission date for this presentation, but it is attachment D in your materials. So High Rock Lake is a reservoir in the Yadkin River that was originally constructed to support a hydroelectric dam in the mid-1920s. The dam was managed by Alcoa Power Generating Incorporated until around 2016 when it was sold to Cube Hydro Carolinas. High Rock Lake is the first in a series of Yadkin River reservoirs, with the Tuckertown Reservoir being immediately below the High Rock Lake Dam. The lake's drainage area is in the Piedmont region, just south and east of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and historically the area has had extensive agriculture, but over recent decades has experienced a decline in agricultural land use and an increase in urban development. Multiple urban centers are located within the High Rock Lake drainage area and include the cities of High Point, Lexington, Salisbury, Thomasville, and Winston-Salem. And the drainage area includes part or all of 14 North Carolina counties, including Alexander, Allegheny, Ashe, Caldwell, Davidson, Davie, Forsyth, Guilford, Iredell, Rowan, Stokes, Surrey, Watauga, Wilkes, and Yadkin, plus a small area in Carroll and Patrick counties, Virginia. And I apologize if I butchered any of those county names. The lake is classified by the EMC as Class B and as a Class Water Supply 4. And High Rock Lake serves as a popular site for recreational activities, especially for fishing and boating. And the town of Denton water treatment plant has a drinking water intake that's about 0.5 miles downstream of the High Rock Lake Dam. High Rock Lake has a history of nutrient impacts dating back to the 1970s, when it was determined to be North Carolina's most eutrophic lake as part of the EPA National Eutrophication Survey. And this was out of 16 North Carolina lakes that were studied as part of that survey. High Rock Lake is currently listed as being impaired on the Clean Water Act 303D impaired water bodies list for the existing statewide Chlorophyll-a standard of 40 micrograms per liter, as well as for pH and turbidity. And it's really these impairments which can result in environmental impacts such as algal blooms, fish kills, and aesthetic concerns that resulted in High Rock Lake being included as part of the Nutrient Criteria Development Plan, or again, referred to as the NCDP. The impairment status from the 2014 integrated report can be seen here, with the majority of High Rock Lake shown in red indicating the areas of impairment. And I've also included notations here indicating the location of the High Rock Lake Dam, which, if you can see my little laser pointer, is right down here towards the bottom, as well as the upper portion of the Tuckertown Reservoir in blue here. So the NCDP process was discussed as an information item presented during the January 2021 Water Quality Committee meeting, and I'll just provide a quick review of that information here. So North Carolina currently has established flexible nutrient control strategies based upon statewide water quality standard for Chlorophyll-a and use of nutrient-sensitive waters classifications. However, nutrients continue to affect water quality. The NCDP was established in 2014 and updated in 2019 in cooperation with EPA as a process to develop nutrient criteria that could then be adopted as water quality standards for North Carolina surface waters. Once adopted into rule, these nutrient criteria standards can then be used to enact regulatory controls via nutrient management strategies or other water quality protection measures to address environmental impacts related to nutrients. The High Rock Lake Reservoir was the first water body that was evaluated for site-specific nutrient criteria. As such, the NCDP Science Advisory Council, also known as the SAC, was tasked with evaluating the need for site-specific nutrient criteria in High Rock Lake and with developing nutrient criteria recommendations if needed. The SAC discussed High Rock Lake nutrient criteria for about 4 years and ultimately produced a set of recommendations for the development of site-specific Chlorophyll-a criteria to address the nutrient concerns present in the lake. The use of site-specific Chlorophyll-a criteria is significant here, as this criteria aims to kind of tailor the potential Chlorophyll-a standard to the unique characteristics of this specific water body. So basically, in other words, it's the goal was to really get the Chlorophyll-a standard right for High Rock Lake. And then one additional thing I wanted to mention is that while the NCDP was originally established in 2014, efforts to develop nutrient-related criteria and management strategies have been ongoing for many years. Prior to the commencement of the High Rock Lake SAC, the division had been involved in collaborative efforts with stakeholders as part of a technical advisory committee to help the development of a watershed model and nutrient response model. And the Yadkin-Petey River Basin Association provided extensive monitoring data to help with modeling development, and the division recently updated that group on this proposed High Rock Lake criteria. So the SAC criteria recommendations, which are included as attachment C in your materials, they served as the basis for developing the proposed site-specific Chlorophyll-a criteria that is before the committee today. In addition to the SAC recommendation, implementation considerations such as monitoring schedules and capabilities, and also assessment requirements were taken into consideration to develop the proposed rule language. Following the drafting of this proposed site-specific High Rock Lake criteria rule language, staff consulted with the NCDP Criteria Implementation Committee, otherwise called the CIC, as well as with EPA. And the feedback received from both of these groups led to the development of the DWR Overview of High Rock Lake Chlorophyll-a Site-Specific Standard Proposal and Assessment Methodology Recommendation document, which is provided as Attachment B. And this document really just offers an overview of the development of the proposed site-specific standard and also includes a recommendation for an associated assessment methodology. Now, the overview document discusses a number of topics. It includes the proposed standards language, the narrative component of the proposed standard, the application of the proposed standard in shallow waters, and the intended method for assessment of High Rock Lake for chlorophyll-a impairments. Much of the information in this document was also used to inform the regulatory impact analysis that is provided as Attachment D. And before we go further, I just want to make mention of, it's important to note that this is not a blanket criteria proposal for the state. So we really want to stress that this site-specific chlorophyll-a proposed standard applies specifically to High Rock Lake and is only for chlorophyll-a. And this brings us to the actual proposed site-specific High Rock Lake criteria. So this proposed criteria language will appear in 15A NCAC 02B 0211 as subitem 4A. And it also slightly modifies the chlorophyll-a standard introduction paragraph, which you can see in Attachment A for the details of that. Now, the full language of the proposed site-specific High Rock Lake criteria can be seen in Attachment A and is also shown here. This language is fairly dense and difficult to read on the slide, but I just included it here so you can see the language as it would appear in rule. I'm going to read through this language and then break it down over the next few slides to address each of the individual components. But before I do that, I want to note that there is an error in the index numbers that are listed here. And I'll address this a little bit later in the presentation. But for now, again, the language will appear in 15A NCAC 02B 0211 4A and reads site-specific High Rock Lake Reservoir, index numbers 12-108.5, 12-114, 12-117-1, 12-117-3, and 12-118.5. And this is where there's an error, and I'll address that in a few slides. Chlorophyll-a corrected. Not greater.
Sorry, I dialed the wrong number. Excuse me.
Oh, sure. Not greater than a growing season geometric mean of 35 micrograms per liter in the Photic Zone, based on samples collected in a minimum of 5 different months during the growing season. For the purpose of this subitem, the growing season is April 1 through October 31, and the Photic Zone is represented by a composite sample taken from the water surface to twice the measured Secchi depth. Chlorophyll-a shall not occur in amounts that result in an adverse impact as defined in 15A NCAC 02H.1002. So that's a lot. Sorry, let's see. There we go. So that's a lot, but there are a lot of individual components that we could break this down into. And I'll go into the detail of each of these components in the following slides. But these components are the spatial definition of the site, the magnitude, the duration with a temporal consideration, a water column component, a sampling requirement, a narrative statement, and a frequency component. So we'll start with the spatial definition. So defining the spatial extent where a standard will apply is an important component for a site-specific standard. For High Rock Lake, we used the water body index numbers that you see listed here. And these index numbers correspond to the defined extent of High Rock Lake in the Ncdp and already appear as part of the classification of these waters. So this was a convenient and established means of defining the site. They incorporate the main stem of the lake and its tributaries as highlighted in blue in this map and are intended to extend down to the High Rock Lake Dam. And that's where the error was found. So the error was identified in the list of index numbers after this presentation was submitted. The portion of High Rock Lake language that lists the index numbers that define the spatial extent of the lake does not include the part right near the dam. I think this happened because the classification area in the lower part of High Rock Lake does not end right at the dam. that area gets wrapped into classified area that is part of the Tuckertown and Baden reservoirs. So basically there wasn't a clean split at the High Rock Lake Dam. And this just kind of slipped through when we were putting the language together. So the proposed High Rock language will be amended to include the language in red that you see on the slide to address the unintentional exclusion of the lower portion of High Rock Lake to the dam. And that new part of the language will read, Part A, site-specific High Rock Lake Reservoir, index numbers 12-108.5, 12-114, 12-117-1, 12-117-3, 12-118.5, and the uppermost portion of 12-124.5 to the dam of High Rock Lake. And really what we're talking about here, if I go back, if you can see my laser pointer, you'll notice that on this slide, this shows kind of all of the index numbers that were used for defining High Rock Lake. So the whole lake is pretty much highlighted in blue. And then there's just this little portion down here where you see the kind of horizontal line that goes across. That's the High Rock Lake Dam. This part that's not highlighted was intended to be included with all these other index numbers. So what this language does is that since that small portion of High Rock Lake was wrapped up in this classification, this stream index number, which includes not only the upper portion, the 0.6 mile upstream of the dam of High Rock Lake, but also all the way down to the Baden Lake Dam. We're just separating this out and identifying it here in red, that the uppermost portion of 12-124.5, which is right here, to the dam of High Rock Lake is being included in this site-specific High Rock Lake Chlorophyll-a standard. So I hope that's clear, and I certainly can answer more questions on that later. But moving on, here we go. Okay, next we have the magnitude. So the magnitude is the numeric concentration of chlorophyll-a specific to High Rock Lake that was determined to be protective of the various uses of the lake. These uses include aquatic life, water supply, and recreation. And for High Rock Lake, the magnitude of chlorophyll-a is set to 35 micrograms per liter for the protection of all of these uses. Much of this information was based on the SAC evaluation of chlorophyll-a concentrations obtained through the scientific literature. And this provided the ranges of chlorophyll-a that can be protective of the various designated uses. And the graphic on the right there just shows kind of part of the process that the SAC went through as they were evaluating this information. And this is discussed in much more detail in attachment C of your materials, which is the High Rock Lake SAC criteria recommendation. The duration is the period of time over which samples are examined to compare to the magnitude. For High Rock Lake, this duration is expressed as a growing season geometric mean, with the growing season being defined as April 1 through October 31. And an important consideration of this growing season duration component is that sampling must occur in the minimum of 5 different growing season months. So this basically results in a minimum of 5 samples and ensures that data is collected over the course of the growing season. There's also a spatial component within the water column that must be considered. And this is consistent with how reservoirs are routinely monitored in North Carolina. It requires that samples be collected as composite samples throughout the photic zone. The photic zone is defined as the uppermost layer of a water body that receives sunlight, which allows for phytoplankton to perform photosynthesis. It's determined as being 2 times the Secchi depth, and the Secchi depth is determined by lowering a disk down to a depth where it is no longer visible in the water column. Now, this depth is then recorded as the Secchi depth and provides a measure of the transparency of the water. And the use of 2 times the Secchi depth to estimate the photic zone is a general guideline that's based on studies of aquatic plant growth. So composite samples are required to be collected from just below the surface down to 2 times the Secchi depth. And if the Secchi depth is clear to the bottom, the division's protocol is to take a composite sample down to 0.5 to 0.3 meters from the bottom without disturbing the sediment. Next, we have the narrative component of the proposed standard. So narrative standards generally complement numeric standards and address situations that numeric standard components may not capture. For example, the narrative standard may be referred to in incidents where isolated adverse impacts to the uses are identified that would not be captured by routine monitoring and assessment of the criteria. And basically, this would refer to kind of more localized situations where chlorophyll-a impacts are being observed on scales that are not affecting the entire lake. Just as an example, something like a discharge of nutrients leading to increased chlorophyll-a concentrations in a specific area. Another thing that I want to touch on is the narrative language that is proposed as part of this criteria. So even though a narrative statement for chlorophyll-a already exists in 15A NCAC 02B 0211, the additional language proposed in the site-specific High Rock Lake criteria is intended to clarify that discharges and loadings are considered. The existing chlorophyll-a narrative only mentions discharge, which can be vague. And the term adverse impact was selected as this language was, one, recently adopted by the EMC in 2018. Two, there is a precedent for it being cited in other 02B 0200 rules, namely the Water Supply 1 rules. And three, it is clearly defined in Rule 02H.1002. And this new narrative language was deemed necessary to more specifically address this SAC recommendation, which recommended employing a narrative component to the standard, but did not recommend specific language. And then the last component is the water quality standard frequency. So when we talk about frequency, what we're really kind of asking is, how often can chlorophyll-a occur at levels above the standard without impacting the uses? For High Rock Lake, the site-specific chlorophyll-a standard is proposed as being a not greater than measure, which is similar to the current statewide chlorophyll-a standard, which is not greater than 40 micrograms per liter in non-trout waters. However, where the 40 microgram per liter statewide chlorophyll standard is based on an instantaneous measure of chlorophyll-a at a single point in time, the High Rock Lake criteria is proposed as not greater than a seasonal geometric mean of 35 micrograms per liter based on composite samples in the Photic Zone with data collected in a minimum of 5 growing season months. So even though this is written as not greater than, the proposed language actually allows for a degree of flexibility in determining the attainment of the standard. And just kind of as an example, some of these growing season months may have chlorophyll concentrations above 35 micrograms per liter, but as long as this is not continuously occurring over the entire season, the standard would not be violated. Now, on a side note, it's important to note that for integrated reporting purposes, or the listing of impaired waters on the 303D list, the determination of impairment in High Rock Lake will be addressed in a separate assessment methodology that will come to the EMC following the adoption of the site-specific chlorophyll-a criteria. And your attachment B, which is the DWR overview document, describes the recommended assessment method that complements this proposed High Rock Lake chlorophyll-a criteria. So that brings us back to our timeline. Our estimated timeline for High Rock Lake chlorophyll-a criteria is shown here. The goal is to publish the notice of text and begin the comment period September 1st, 2021, with a public hearing held in mid to late October, and then back to the EMC for adoption in January of 2022, and submission to EPA for the Clean Water Act review by May of 2022. And with that, I'll just like to restate our action item request that the division is seeking approval to proceed to the EMC for public notice and hearings on this proposed site-specific standard for chlorophyll-a in High Rock Lake that will appear in 15A NCAC 02B 0211. Again, my name is Chris Ventolaro, and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ventolaro, and I apologize if I popped in there for a moment. I was trying to reach Commissioner Carter, and I'm glad to hear that he's on the line now. Welcome, Commissioner Carter. Can you communicate with us, or are you panelists? hope he'll be able to speak if he wants to. Okay, thank you very much. I don't think this is necessary, but I will go ahead and say, and I actually discussed with council, I was born and raised in the town of Denton. I no longer live there now. And after discussing with council, I do not have a conflict of interest. So just wanted that to be clear. Are there any questions for Mr. Ventilaro? I will say.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Was someone to speak? Did I hear someone speak?
Yeah, it's Commissioner. I have a question if nobody else does.
Thank you, Commissioner Moss. Go ahead.
Okay. Two questions, actually. Thank you for the presentation, Chris. Is DWR going to go back to the Criteria Implementation Committee to help develop the strategy as this moves forward?
Sorry, you're referring to like a nutrient management strategy?
Yes, like how this actually gets implemented.
So that that will be once the standard's adopted and assessment methodology is approved and the waters are assessed and that kind of goes on. The nutrient management strategy will kind of take its own rulemaking path. I don't know others that are on with the division might be able to better answer whether they will go before any of the High Rock Lake kind of advisory councils or committees. I don't know if they will, so I could just kind of leave it at that. But I think, I mean, for the most part, the Ncdp process for High Rock Lake, I think, is kind of over at this point. I hope that kind of helps.
But there is a process for, this is Marion Deerhake, there is a process for public involvement, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So that would go through its own rulemaking and its own stakeholder hearing meetings and things of that nature. So the public will have plenty of opportunity to comment on that.
Thank you. And my other question, which I realize also goes beyond the decision that we have in front of us today, but I'll ask it anyway because I'm interested. You know, we recently saw some examples from Falls and Jordan Lake about developing a more integrated approach to the nutrient management strategy that seems to have a lot of benefits. Do you know or expect whether a similar effort might happen in High Rock Lake?
That's a great question. I know when the High Rock Lake Science Advisory Council was meeting, and they met for quite a long time and discussed a lot of different ways to look at nutrient criteria development. They did talk about integrated types of standards. They talked about what other states have done and how they kind of had other states have approached this in various ways, including Florida, South Carolina, Georgia. So yeah, while they did talk about that, it didn't that didn't quite make it really to their final recommendation. So it'll be kind of interesting going forward as we move the criteria proposed here are going to apply specifically to High Rock Lake. As the Ncdp process continues on, we still have two other pilot water bodies to look at, which address other types of water bodies, the Albemarle Sound, which is addressing estuaries, and the rock portion of the Rocky River to address rivers and streams. But then kind of after that, there's going to be kind of a circling back to figure out how can we take what we've learned through all of this process and start looking at applying it statewide. And I think that'll employ more conversations with SAC members at that point in time too, to get guidance for how we do that. So it could certainly come up again. Yeah, and it will just kind of be interesting to see how things develop.
Interesting. Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Commissioner Myberg. I have one.
Please go ahead.
Chris, I really want to commend you on your presentation, and this is really quite fascinating in many respects. First, just a couple of things. One is I gather that generally the division has not engaged in many site-specific criteria developments before. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement. I don't think we don't have too many. If we do, we have some management strategy type things like out in Goose Creek. But yeah, it's kind of new. Yeah.
Although it's been, I know for a fact that it's been used in other states, so it's certainly not unprecedented, but it's sort of new for North Carolina. And it seemed to me that what you were trying to do, well, secondly, seems like there have been years and years and years of discussion about this. So it's not that exactly that this is a new issue. And I want to commend the division for trying to take input from all of those years of discussion and formulate into a proposal, which has the effect of sort of concentrating people's attention and giving the commission the ability to do what it needs to do, which is to make decisions. So that's very helpful. It seemed to me that you were trying to walk an important line here, which is to try to address the long-term status of High Rock Lake by going to the longer-term average and the longer averaging time, a seasonal averaging time as opposed to instantaneous measures. I also think it seemed like you were trying to have a good representative sample, which was also appropriate. But it seemed like with the narrative standard, you were also trying to address some of the potential issues that may come up that somehow the longer term average may miss, like particular concentrations along a bay or cove. Is that a fair characterization of what at a broad level you're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, you know, a lot of what the kind of broader scope of looking at the lake might miss are some of those specific impacts that might occur in areas away from that are, you know, very much used for recreation and stuff like that. So we want to have flexibility and tools to address issues.
Well, I think that, and I will say, just my opinion, is that's a pretty elegant solution to what is a very gnarly problem in environmental regulation, and not just limited to water. So my kudos to you and the staff and to all the stakeholder participants who came through this. It seemed like this is a way to move things forward from just sort of being in an endless do loop on conversations and start to focus on what you could actually do with the right target for what you're trying to achieve. So my kudos to you and the staff for working on this.
Are there other comments or questions from commissioners? I'd be glad to offer one or two myself, but I want to give others a chance to speak.
Madam Chairman, this is Commissioner McAdams, and I have a comment, an observation underlying which is lots of questions. I appreciate Mr. Vendolaro, the presentation you've made and the tremendous amount of work the Division of Water Resources is putting into this, and I'm sure it goes on. But coincident with receiving this PowerPoint and the supporting information, we've also received inputs from the Upper Neuse River Water Basin Association, Upper Neuse River Basin Association, I guess it is, whose board is comprised of a lot of well-respected elected officials, and it's a pretty thorough dive into some suggestions about to set some of these standards and set the procedures differently than what are presented here. I come at this as a commissioner without deep expertise in these matters, but looking ahead at the approval process, this will go through a public hearing. And what I will wish for is that there be a resolution of the issues raised in this document and an explanation, perhaps in the hearing officer's report, that these matters be addressed and explained so that we who sit on the commission and need to make a judgment on this will have responses to these issues and perhaps modifications to what is currently projected as appropriate. I just ask that you be mindful of that, and when this comes back to us in the months ahead, that we have that information to use to act on.
Very good. One thing I will mention is in attachment B, the DWR overview document, DWR overview. We do have stuff that we kind of put that together as in part as a response to some UNRVA comments and other comments from other groups as we went through the NCDP process. So some of that information will be there, but yeah, we will certainly keep your point in mind, Commissioner McAdams. Thank you.
And Chris, I think Commissioner McAdams makes a really important point, which is that as you noted in your schedule in the presentation, there's a pretty extensive public comment period that exists on this that goes on beyond any action the commission may take and I just imagine based on past experience that some of the commenters will continue to be in dialogue with the staff even prior to the hearing on this at the commission in July. But my feeling, and I think Commissioner McAdams is expressing my own sentiment as well, is you'd like to see all of the comments out there so that everybody gets to see them and participate equitably in the public comment process, because there has been a lot of review and work on this, and many people have weighed in from many different perspectives, and they all have to be considered adequately and equitably and responded to in the comment process. And what I hear Commissioner McAdams suggesting, and which I would hope you would agree with, is that the department and the division and its staff would be committed to addressing all of those comments with the hearing officer in response to the public comment period. John, is that a fair paraphrase?
Yes, Chairman Myberg, that is addressing them not only defensively, but by modifying what's proposed as appropriate, of course.
Very good. Thank you.
And I thank you as well.
Thank you, Commissioner McAdams, and also Chairman Myberg. Would you like an opportunity, Mr. Vinalaro, to just review briefly the interaction with stakeholders, say from, I think, maybe last August forward, to show the commissioners the amount of contact and exchange that's been going on? Just a brief timeline.
Yeah, sure. So as you know, the SAC had met for about a good 4 years to discuss High Rock Lake. The Ncdp was composed of not only the SAC, which provided scientific comments and input, but also the Criteria Implementation Committee, or the CIC, which were tasked with providing kind of social and fiscal comments on criteria recommendations that the SAC that developed throughout the Ncdp process. CIC members would often participate in SAC meetings, and we would hold CIC meetings every once in a while to kind of update all of the CIC members on what was going on with the SAC, as well as going on, providing recordings of recordings of minutes and WebEx recordings of SAC meetings that we posted online so that anybody can access them and review them. After developing the proposed site-specific High Rock Lake criteria, we met with the CIC, I believe that was in December 3rd, to kind of provide them the draft criteria for comment. And through some of those comments, some of the recommendations that we walked away with from that was the development of the DWR overview document. So we went back and we kind of developed that over time, and that's one of the reasons why our original intent to bring this before the committee a few months ago, but we needed more time to develop that overview document. So we kind of worked off of the CIC and EPA comments on that. We've also talked with the Yadkin PD River Basin and provided this draft proposal to them just to kind of give them knowledge of what was going on, since they were so heavily invested in this process overall, and just would impact directly their area. So I think we've had a lot of input with stakeholders, and of course we will always, whenever we do triennial reviews, we always make it a point to take all of the comments that we receive and address them in our hearing officers' reports. So that's definitely something that we find, that personally to me it's very important that we maintain, transparency in that, and, that everything is fair and that everyone has a chance to kind of comment and weigh in on things. So that's very important to me personally. And I know it's important to other staff as well.
Thank you. So I understand there's been exchange and intercommunication with all of the parties up through April. I think April, maybe you said, was the last interaction with the Yadkin PD River Basin Association.
That is correct.
I want to pass along my thanks to all of the parties who've been involved. This has been
Chair,
a
unfortunately,
process.
you were breaking up.
Okay, I'm gonna cut my video off. Is that better?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you'll have to go back to, you want to express your thanks.
Okay, well, take that as you wish. my thanks to all of the people who participated in it. It's been a very long process, and this is considered an inaugural site-specific standard for the state. And the state's working over the years with EPA to develop the nutrient criteria development plan. It's been a formalized process with the establishment of the two committees that each have their own charge and work more or less in sequence rather than sitting at the table for the same decision-making, same meetings. Special thanks to the scientists and to the members of the CIC. There's still a lot of dialogue still to be had, and we thank them for staying engaged with this along the way. Are there any other comments? I'm willing to entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, this is Pat Harris. I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Harris.
Yes, I'd like to move to proceed to the EMC for public notice and hearings on the proposed site-specific standard for Chlorophyll-a in High Rock Lake that will appear in 15A NCAC 02B .0211.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Harris. We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Madam Chair, I'm pleased to second. John McAdams.
Thank you, Commissioner McAdams. Is there any further discussion? If not, we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Carter. I get mixed signals about whether or not he's live online.
Madam Chair, I do not see him on either list.
Okay.
But
he was on briefly. Commissioner McAdams.
Aye.
Commissioner
Aye.
Honest. Vice Chair Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman Myberg wish to vote.
Yes, I vote aye on this.
Thank you. And Chairman Deerhake.
And I also note I have a note from Commissioner Carter who says that he's still trying to connect. So for what it's worth, somewhere there's a disconnect here.
Okay. And I myself will vote yes. And as a reminder, Commissioner Gillespie is absent, Commissioner Davis is absent, and we're working with Commissioner Carter to get online. But we do have quorum and the vote passes. Thank you. This will come before the EMC in July. Our second agenda item is a request for approval of the 2022 303D listing and delisting methodology. is be presented by Pam Bean with the Division of Water Resources Modeling and Assessment Branch. Ms. Beam, are you ready?
Chris, can you pass the ball to Pam, please?
Almost ready.
Yes, it's just saying share content. I don't have anything shared
Okay.
at the moment.
All right, maybe I probably can move it, actually. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Where's Pam? I got it.
Sure.
Pam. I gotta find her.
Pam,
Help if I sign off, Shelton?
No, I got it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I did the wrong person. One more time.
okay, I've got it.
There you go.
I'm terrified to turn on my video, but hopefully you all can hear me properly and see my presentation at this point.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just started the slideshow. All right. Well, good afternoon, Chair Deerhagen, Commissioners. My name is Pam Beam, and I work in the Modeling and Assessment Branch. We are here today to request approval to go to the EMC for approval of the 2022 303D listing and delisting assessment methodology. The outline is pretty short. I'll review the statute, talk about timeliness, review some terminology, and finish with the proposed updates to the 2022 methodology. Here's the relevant statute that brings the EMC into the process and has been interpreted to require EMC approval of the decision-making process for listing and delisting waters from the 303D list. So the reason you're hearing about both the results of the 2020 list, which is an information item later on from Kamek Nutt, and considering approval of the 2022 methodology today comes down to timeliness. Usually we would wait for EPA approval of the previous list before moving forward to the next. But 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which is kind of crazy. It's been around that long. So there's a nationwide push for all states to submit their 2022 303D list by April 1st of next year. And because we are not proposing significant changes to the 2022 methodology, and the 2020 methodology was basically the same used for 2018 with a minor tweak, we feel pretty comfortable moving forward with 2022 prior to EPA approval. You may recall that we had one of our fastest approval turnarounds ever on the 2018 303D list, and it was also the first unconditional approval we've received. And we've been working closely with EPA to ensure a fast turnaround on the 2020 approval as well. It should be noted that EPA has enacted measures on their end to speed up their approval process to within 30 days. So this requires a lot of upfront conversations before we formally submit the list to EPA for approval. So they've already been reviewing 2020, and we haven't heard of any concerns from them at this point. We do need the methodology for 2022 approved by both the Water Quality Committee and the EMC before we can provide guidance to third parties on data submittal. There's a lot of interest from third parties to provide data. So we want to be able to give them time to get their data in the right format. Finally, North Carolina just needs to get back on schedule. We've missed the Clean Water Act deadline for several cycles, I mean, for a lot of reasons. But we've been playing catch up, and this will get us back on track. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the common terminology, and we'll start with the 303D list. The 303D list is the list of impaired waters, where a total maximum daily load, or TMDL, or some kind of alternative management action is needed. It's called the 303D list because it is established by Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. For those who aren't aware, a TMDL is establishes the maximum amount of the pollutant of concern in a water body and sets limits on sources, both point and non-point. For the 303D list, public review and comment is required for a minimum of 30 days. The 303D list is due to EPA every even-numbered year on April 1st. EPA does have final approval authority, and as I mentioned on the last slide, they're really pushing to complete approval actions within 30 days of state submittal. In fact, what I've heard from Region 4 is there's a bit of a push to see how fast they can get them through. There's a little bit of a game contest going on to see how quickly they can get it done. The 303D listing and delisting methodology is what requires EMC approval. The methodology simply documents the decision-making process for determining whether water should be included on the 303D list or removed, which is called delisting. Delistings occur either when water quality has improved or when a TMDL or alternative is in place. We are required to submit the methodology to EPA, but EPA is not required to approve. However, if EPA does not agree with a listing or delisting decision, which of course is based on the methodology, they can disapprove or only partially approve a state's 303D list. This happened in 2014 and 2016, which is part of the reason that we're playing catch up now. Another term you will hear a lot is the integrated report, or IR. It's basically the list of all assessed waters in assigned categories, including the 303D list. The IR is established by sections 305B and 303D of the Clean Water Act. There is no requirement to receive public comment on the IR, but we do provide it to the public during 303D review for completeness, basically because we've been requested to do so by the public to help with their review. The Clean Water Act requires submittal of the IR to EPA, but this, again, EPA does not approve or disapprove. We show this figure every time to explain the different integrated report categories. Category 1 is for waters meeting criteria. Again, we don't really use category 2. Category 3 is for that gray area where the result of the assessment is inconclusive. That could be through the decision-making process or if there simply wasn't enough data. Categories 4 and 5 are both for waters exceeding criteria or are considered impaired. Category 4 is for waters that are impaired but already have a TMDL or other management strategy in place. So category 4 is not the 303D list, and Falls Lake is an example of that. Falls Lake is impaired in certain segments for Chlorophyll-a. Falls Lake does not have a TMDL, but Falls Lake does have a management strategy in place through state rulemaking, which EPA considers to be the equivalent of a TMDL as long as the rules are being implemented. Category 5 is the 303D list. And again, that's for waters that are impaired and need a TMDL or some other alternative management action. The 303D list is what the EMC establishes the methodology for, and that is what we're asking for approval of today. So it's important to note that waters are assessed by parameter. So for example, you could have a segment of a creek that is in category 5 on the 303D list for high pH, but might be in category 1 for meeting criteria for dissolved oxygen. Okay, so now we'll get into the 2022 303D assessment. The 2022 303D listing and delisting methodology was provided as an attachment with the changes from 2020 highlighted. And as you can see, there aren't very many. Mostly it's just updating these data windows and then one for pathogen criteria, which I'll talk about later. As a reminder, the data window for assessment is 5 years. Every assessment adds 2 new years and drops the 2 oldest years. So for example, the slideshow shows the 2020 data window was 2014 to 2018. The data window for 2022 then will drop 2014 and 2015 and add the data from 2019 and 2020. New data years are used in the methodology to help us make delisting decisions. So the 303D list is generated using 5 different assessment procedures, depending on the parameter. These are all summarized in the methodology document. Number 1 is the one we talk about the most, numeric criteria assessment. This is for parameters with a numeric standard, such as dissolved oxygen, pH, Chlorophyll-a, turbidity. This is where we apply the statistical confidence formula, as well as consider the newer years of data. Number 2 is for biological ratings of benthic and fish community populations. Number 3 is for pathogen criteria to assess recreation standards. And this is the one where we are proposing adding a clarification to the 2022 methodology. Number 4 is for shellfish growing areas. And by far, this is the highest number of impairments we have on the 303D list. Finally, number 5 is for fish consumption when there are fish advisories issued associated with fish tissue data. You'll hear about the results of the 2020 303D list later on, again in that information item from Kim McNutt. The comments we received did not raise any new concerns about the 303D listing and delisting methodology. Most were about the integrated report. And in fact, most were already thoroughly addressed in the response to comments on the 2018 list. He'll summarize more of the comments we received in his presentation later on. We have also heard from the public numerous times that they wish to see consistency in the methodology across cycles. Therefore, we are not proposing any changes to the numerical method. The numerical method assessment approach that the EMC and DWR developed in 2018 and applied again in 2020 really seems to be working very well and provides a holistic, balanced approach to listing and delisting decisions. So the only change we are proposing for 2022 is to add a clarification to the pathogen criteria for saltwater, which is an enterococci parameter. This change is highlighted on page 12 of the methodology included in your attachments. That's actually it. It's actually page 8. This should be page 8. This is the only area where we often receive multiple, what we call 5 and 30s in an assessment data window. A 5 and 30 means there have been 5 or more samples in 30 days. The Division of Marine Fisheries Recreational Water Quality Monitoring Program provides the data for this through their beach monitoring program. So we needed to provide a pathway to evaluate for instances where we have more than one 5 and 30, which in 2020, there were maybe about 10 cases in more than 250. So after posting the methodology and the presentation on the agenda for this meeting, it came out that the way we had worded the clarification was a little clunky. This is the language on this slide is what we are proposing as the assessment criteria for 2022 for enterococci. I can come back to this at the end if you want to peruse it further. All we did is move a sentence that was up in the top paragraph down to the exceeding criteria, that third sub-bullet under exceeding criteria, just to make it clear that the change is occurring only in those instances where we have multiple events where there are more than 5 or more samples in 30 days. And that's just providing a way to address multiple 5 and 30s. The timeline for the 2022 303D list is extremely tight. But if we get the green light to move forward today to go to the EMC tomorrow, we stand a pretty good chance of meeting the 2022 April 1st deadline. We will have a deadline for third-party data submittal of June 30th. So we need to be able to get them guidance ASAP. And if we have to wait until, say, July for EMC approval, we'll obviously have to push these deadlines. The assessment itself will take about 4 to 5 months. And during that time, we'll be working very closely with our water sciences section as they prepare and QA/QC the data from the monitoring programs. So right now, we are still hoping to be able to provide the public with 60 days for review. But any delays, including delays in EMC approval, will impact the amount of time we can allocate for public review. The goal is to get the list to EPA on March 31st of 2022. So again, our proposed action today is that we recommend approval to proceed to the EMC tomorrow for approval of the 2022 303D listing and delisting assessment methodology. And I think I would add here with the corrected language that we've proposed today on that previous slide, which I'll go back to. This is not rulemaking, so there's no 30-day waiver required. All right, so that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Beam, and thank you for the adjustment to the language to remove some of the awkwardness, but not change the substance of it. Are there any questions? Any comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have just a comment. Yeah. Pam, thank you for the presentation. And sort of the most important thing I think about this is this idea that we're basically going forward with the same approach that was used in 2018 and 2020. And that's what I heard, I took away from this. And just because my historian aspect got the better of me, I went back and looked at the notes for the March 2018 meeting of the committee, or rather of the commission, and noted that at that time the motion to approve the list, the criteria was moved by Commissioner Rubin and seconded by then Commissioner Pruitt, and passed unanimously from the commission, so that there's now a pretty good track record of having moved this forward, this approach forward, and seems to have, from your report, seems to have served us well in terms of finally making work on catching up with the list in EPA, which I know from my past personal experience was a sore point for many years. So congratulations with that. One thing I noted that Commissioner Keene asked back in 2018, and which seemed like a reasonable thing to do, is that somewhere in the while you're in the middle of the process, it's probably worth, without putting any delays in it, to come back and give the commission just a kind of a status report on how things are going. And so I would suggest that that should such a question like that occur in discussions tomorrow, that's something you might want to build in as a check-in, to just simply report back to the commission how things are going in the middle of the process you've already laid out. Because it is, there are competing desires, one of which is to move quickly, which I very much share, and the other is to make sure everybody knows what's going on and there are no surprises. So just I offer that as a thought.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Myberg. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members? I was around at that time as well when Chairman Myberg cited the 2018 vote, and thank him for keeping good records and being able to call out that vote. I'll be willing to entertain a motion to carry this to the EMC tomorrow.
I can offer a motion. It's Commissioner Monis.
Thank you, Commissioner Monis.
Okay, I move to approve the 2022 303D listing and delisting methodology.
To carry it to EMC tomorrow.
Right.
For review, and is it a recommendation from the committee to approve?
You tell me, what do we need to do to get us to tomorrow?
Do you want to post the phrasing again, Pam, just if you have it written the way you think it needs to be expressed?
Slide 14. Oops.
Is this it?
Yeah, 50.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, I move to approve to proceed to the EMC for their approval of the proposed clarifications to the 2022 303D listing and delisting assessment methodology.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Monas. Do I hear a second?
This is Pat Harris. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair Harris. Any further discussion? If there is none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Art Carter is not able to join us. Commissioner Davis is absent. Commissioner Gillespie is absent. Commissioner McAdams.
Aye.
Commissioner Monas.
Aye.
Vice Chair Harris.
Aye.
Chairman Myberg, do you care to vote?
I do. I vote aye.
Okay. Thank you. And I, as chairman, also vote for this committee. Agree to the EMC tomorrow. So that motion passes. Ms. Beam. We'll now move to our information item. As I pointed out earlier, there are EMC agenda items tomorrow that come out of this committee, but we weren't planning to discuss those today. Our next information item is an overview of 2020 Integrated Report 303D list. Cam McNutt, Division of Water Resources Modeling and Assessment Branch, will be presenting.
Okay, sound test, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. How about the presentation? Can you see that?
Yes.
How about now?
There are a couple of blank blocks in the middle, but it's clearing up, I think.
We see your
I see
next
a blank
slide as well.
box.
Yeah.
About
See
that?
both slides. There you go. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, it took me 20 minutes to get on the meeting as well. I'm glad I started early. Okay, I'm Cam McNutt. I'm also with the Modeling and Assessment Branch, and I'm here to review the results of the 2020 Water Quality Assessment, and basically to look at what the results were of the methodology that Pam just went over. As we indicated, we didn't really have any changes from the 2018 process. Here's a quick review of the schedule that we're on right now. I'm kind of highlighting there that in red that we have already started the 2022 process. So we're kind of in the middle of finishing one up while starting another one. We had several issues that got us off schedule this time, including a little bit of COVID, trying to get everybody with their data back together, that getting everybody used to working online instead of in person. So hopefully we can get this started and at least get our approval process with EPA for 2020 done. Our federal funding formula is heavily based on the integrated report, and they're redoing that in September of this year. So we really want to make sure we have the most current data in there as they proceed in that process. For the 2020 process, we used data that were collected from 2014 to 2018. The numbers that you see next to each of those data collection programs are the number of stations that were utilized, but each station, of course, could have multiple samples at that. But basically, we're looking at just over 1 million observations in that 5-year period. One thing to point out is that we did not have the usual cast of third-party data submitters this time. That was mostly due to COVID issues. We did receive data from Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater, and I have had discussions with the other folks, notably ModMon program, Center for Applied Aquatic Ecology. They are prepared to get their data in for the 2022 process once we finalize the listing and delisting methodology. You've seen this slide multiple times. Here I have the results of the assessments, and we have about 16,000 assessments that are being done. 11,000, just almost 12,000 of them are Category 1 assessments meeting criteria. And our 303D list has 13,064 assessments, and those are spread out over 1,200 assessment units or water bodies. So again, you can have multiple assessments, including impairments in a single water body. We have 524 Category 4 assessments. Those are waters that are exceeding criteria, but we have a management strategy or a TMDL in place. And in this gray area, which in the past, we've moved assessments into the Category 3 or data inconclusive when they did not fit into the other two categories. But our assessment methodology now actually has that as a deliberate path that it meets certain criteria to be in data inconclusive. It's basically a good sized gray area that we've identified through the assessment methods. This time around, these delistings, that means something was moved from Category 5 to one of these others. We had 56 that right now we'll still be working on some of those. And then we had an additional 28 that were shellfish harvesting waters, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second. We also had 173 new listings, not 70, but again, a huge majority of those were shellfish harvesting waters. And the problem that we ran into with the shellfish harvesting waters is that the maps that DWR uses to indicate shellfishing waters are based on 60-year-old USGS maps versus the maps that Marine Fisheries uses to indicate shellfish waters are more modernized and are more encompassing than what DWR classifies as shellfish harvesting waters. So getting the two of those maps to come together is going to be a multiple cycle process. The bottom line is that the amount of area impacted is very small compared to the overall 2-point-something million acres of shellfish harvesting waters. I didn't change that slide. Also, our change from 2018, which was a small clarification about the on the very end of one of our bifurcate decision trees, was that we added a 90% confidence term to a point where we had greater, in the latest data years, where we had greater than 3 excursions. We added 90% confidence to that as to address concerns that when people collected a lot of data, that the 3 excursions would potentially be a very low percentage of the actual data. So we added that 90% confidence to remove that, and it changed the listings from, there were 23 listings just using the greater than 3 in 2018, and in 2020 there were 22 listings. So not a lot of difference happened because of that change in the assessment methodology. Now, another way to look at the assessments are by water bodies, and this will give you an idea about what the universe is that we're dealing with. We have on the left pie chart here, these are all of the active assessment units or water bodies in the state. Close to 10,000 of them we have no data for, so I taken the monitoring part of the pie and expanded it over here, and this is where you see there's 1,211 water bodies that are on the 303D list in red. That means they had at least one assessment that was in Category 5. They could have assessments that are Category 1, but all it takes is one to be in Category 5. And still the bulk of our waters are meeting criteria. And for these water bodies, all the assessments had to be Category 1 assessments. So if we had 62 parameters collected here, then all 62 had to be Category 1 assessments for the water body in whole to be considered in Category 1.
Have we lost communication with Cam?
I'm still here. There's some background issues occurring. I'm trying to stop them.
Okay.
Well, back to public comment period. This is the information that we provided to the public for public comment. And it was the 303D list, which is the part that EPA approves, and then the 2020 303D listing and delisting methodology, which is the part that the EMC approves. We received comments from 6 entities. All of these folks commented in 2018, but we received 15 comments during 2018, and we didn't receive any comments from citizens this year. It's only these organizations. And 5 of the 6 comments were very similar to what we addressed in 2018 regarding the listing and delisting methodology. And we had one kind of newish comment, which I'll go through here in just a second. So as I said, most of the comments were about the listing and delisting methodology. And basically what were explained last time was that the confidence that we use, which are not necessarily standard in science, were really used to optimize between the decisions that we wanted to have a low error rate for listing a water body on the 303D. That's the 90% confidence. And we have allowing a higher error rate for delisting, the 70% confidence. And then we have the 40% confidence in there, and that kind of draws that data inconclusive water bodies that have a low confidence for listing and also a low confidence for delisting. And we addressed most of those concerns last time. We also have that very specific way of putting things into category 3 now. Instead of them just falling into category 3, we have a decision process that documents why it goes into that data inconclusive category. Water body specific issues we have already addressed by actually just talking to the commentors directly and sorting out some confusion on what the categories were, as well as adding things that had been left out, adding assessments that have been left out based on their data. And this was mostly dealing with Charlotte Stormwater Services. So that had already been worked out. The AU, or assessment unit delineation, which has really only been the concern of one of the commentors, and we've been dealing with this for 3 cycles now. And we published the delineation methodology in the 303D assessment process for 2020, so that's in there. And as Pam indicated, we had the pathogen concerns about the pathogen listing and delisting methodologies. And we'll be working with the various groups that collect that data to refine that moving forward. This is different than what the empirical data were on the beach. We've already refined that one. But it has more to do with only having one 5 and 30 sample versus multiple monthly samples in the 5-year assessment period. One of the new issues that has come up this time has to do with the water quality standard wording, and that is water temperature in trout waters. And one of the commenters wanted to know how our interpretation of that did not allow us to actually use that lower temperature to put things on the 303D list. So we'll be addressing that through water quality standards to make some clarifications, and then we'll be coming back to the EMC once that clarification is done, if we need to change the assessment method based on that analysis. And again, I talked a little bit about third-party data earlier. There are quite a few people that will submit data as part of their public comments, and that is not considered a data submittal. Submitted data has got to go through the same process as all of our other data, including public review. So we work with people well up front of doing the assessment to get the data submittal going. So providing data, which is informational during public review process, is fine, but it's not really considered a data submittal. And another thing that will be upcoming in the future is, as well as you saw from that statute, that the EMC does the approval process for the listing and delisting methods, and there's also a prioritization component in there. And we in 2016 committed to EPA to develop basically somewhere in the 50-something water bodies on the 303D list to have some sort of restoration plan in place. That could be a TMDL or something called a watershed action plan or a 9-element plan or a 4B demonstration. There's various different components of those. Today, we got 24 of these plans are in progress, 21 are completed, and we'll start 13 in the next year or so, and hopefully have most of those done by the end of federal fiscal year 2022. But to that end, we will be developing for the next 10-year commitments for 2022 to 2032. We have had a lot of interest from stakeholders in getting into that process, and these would be plans that DWR would be committing resources to. And we have developed several tools and workflows to assist in this process and make it very accessible to stakeholders at all levels, from professionals down to our community scientists. And I believe that you're going to have information on an item on this in the fall. And with that, I'll take questions. I believe we're muted here.
Marion, I think you were on mute.
Thank you. Any comments? I have one or two. I would be interested when one of your last slides, you talked about 24 restoration plans, 21 or 22 completed. What is the meaning of completed? Are you saying that those waters have been restored? Or
No.
that the plan has been fully implemented?
No, it has not been implemented. The plan is now in the process of starting implementation, at least starting implementation. And part of the idea of these plans is that if we do one of these plans in a certain watershed, it makes that watershed open to more restoration funding opportunities, like 319, Clean Water Management Trust Fund. They give points for projects that are in these plan areas. So that is the reason we're putting these together. And it's also to get all of the different organizations that are working in these watersheds kind of on the same page and heading in the same direction.
Okay. So will there be close tracking of the water quality progress as these are implemented?
One of the main goals of developing these plans in this kind of more electronic story map format is to be able to track incremental process at a very fine scale as we move forward.
Okay. And as this being an unusual year in the limited public data or citizen data, I guess, submittals, any sense or any modification to the approach that would make it easier but still maintain the level of quality assurance needed to get new data from the public?
Well, we're going through a lot of different processes on this. We have an outside working group that the river keepers are involved with, some of the other conservation groups. We've been very much talking about standardizing how all these groups collect and submit their data, which will streamline a lot of that. And then I work directly with the data submitters to make sure that they get their information in the way that it needs to be in for us to use it for the 303D list. Now, we are taking data that we can use to look at, for example, effectiveness monitoring. It won't have anything to do with whether something goes on and off the 303D list, but we can do an assessment using these data to indicate whether something's getting better or worse, if there's activities going on. So we're kind of opening up the amount and types of data that we'll be pulling in to evaluate not just 303D list, delisting, but also incremental success or incremental failure of water quality projects that were out there. And we've actually have some community science-based applications for people to go out and do this themselves and not have to go through the more rigorous process of submitting data that we call tier 3 data that's used for regulatory.
I understand as I was visiting some of the far western basins that there's a successful program in Georgia. I don't know whether you've looked into how they are designed and operated for citizen science monitoring and data submittal, but it might be worth exploring if you haven't. The other thing I thought I would suggest is that I don't know how much you collaborate with the North Carolina Museum of Science, Natural Sciences, but they have had a good deal of citizen science programs that they've encouraged over the years for a variety of topics, and they might be interested in collaborating.
I have worked with, I'll just tell you flat out, I completely stole Georgia's program. So that's running in North Carolina. In our environmental education page, it gives them full credit, but we completely made an online application that does that same thing. And then I have worked with the museum in the past, depending on where we're working in the state and what the nature of things are. And a lot of our urban and suburban streams, those have not been of interest to a lot of folks, but that is growing. We're starting to see dots show up on the maps more in the urban and suburban waters complex.
So glad to hear that. My last question was, I was a little uncertain about the numbers you were mentioning on the slide where you showed 70 new listings, I think. I don't know whether you can pull that slide up, but then you said 170. I wasn't sure.
Well, I separated the shellfish harvesting ones out because I think it has to do with how the maps align with each other, and it's an automated process. So if the maps don't align with each other, then you get all of these little blips that overlap with each other. And the extent to it, and I've already done the delisting component of that, which was 28, but the total acreage that was impacted was less than 10. I mean, it's a computer that's pulling all these things together. If someone were using their naked eye, they probably would not be able to see these unless they were really zoomed in. So I'll be working with the marine fisheries folks and our classifications folks to refine those definitions. One of the biggest problems is the coastline does not look the same as it did when the map that we use to do this with does not match what's in our descriptions of the water bodies or what you see with your eyes and imagery. So we do have a mapping group that is developing new maps, and we're going to have to do some interpretation of how our classifications translate into those new maps in order to get that, to remove that assessment area. But if we're just looking at delistings outside of shellfish harvesting or new listings outside of shellfish harvesting, a lot of those are going from category 3 to category 5. So the change in water quality is very minimal, and a lot of those will probably go back and forth. They're the ones that are teetering right on that edge of meeting and exceeding criteria or in that gray area. So there were a lot of those. And then we had, I want to say we had 34 impairments that were identified at new stations that we had not sampled.
Okay.
And we'll break all this down once EPA approves our list. It'll be on our story map, all the kind of details of how these things happen and what we need to do moving forward for public consumption, and also for, to historical record on the decision-making process.
Right. Thank you.
And Cam,
Commissioner?
this is Stan Myber, just to follow up on that. When you said the shoreline is changing, is that just sort of basically changing as a result of normal movements on barrier islands where sand sort of moves from one place to another, or is this a leading edge indicator on some other indicators of subsidence or rising seas?
I think it's a combination of storm disturbance, potentially rising sea levels, and also man-made things. So I could show you some of the images that show how confusing it is between what marine fisheries is mapped as a shellfish growing area, what we have legally mapped as a growing area, and what the actual water coastline looks like right now.
No,
it's hard to get it out. You don't want to look at it.
No, not right now. No, I tell you that you've answered my question, which is that there's not a single factor explanation, which is what I should have figured out to begin with. But I appreciate your spelling out so that it's different in different places and that you do have good visual representations, but I don't want to take the committee's time to go through that right now. Thank you.
Any other committee comments or questions? Well, I thank you for your continued work with all the different parties who are interested in the methodology as well as the listings. Thanks to all the staff for keeping in close touch with the stakeholders on that and hearing their comments and concerns. Thank you, Cam. Well, I believe we have reached near the end of our day, but I want to welcome Director Smith if he would like to make any comments.
Hey, good afternoon, Chair Dick. You're right. Hey, I had just a couple of items I wanted to mention. During the past winter, I made a few remarks about how wet the conditions were and how those kinds of wet settings can cause trouble or problems for wastewater treatment plant operations, and particularly some of the lagoon type systems as well. Talking with some of the regional supervisors, particularly in Fayetteville and Washington and Wilmington, they've indicated that some of the freeboard conditions have improved, just kind of generally would have been experienced or enjoyed some increased temperatures, lack of rain, and higher ET rates, as you would expect in spring. So things have just generally improved. There's been a lot of work to that effect. They did say there's certainly some work left to do, but it's encouraging that some of the animal operations and many of the facilities that have experienced trouble have really improved during the last month or so. They did caution me that weather conditions can change and things can return back to more difficult settings, but right now things are improving. And to that end, right around the corner is hurricane season. And one of the things that we've been doing, I guess behind the scenes a little bit, and one of the resources have been working on developing some training for our regional offices and our central office for this hopefully light hurricane season. We're also been had a training with emergency operations centers so that we're able to help support their operations if they have to stand up for a storm event. And again, like last year, we're making certain we have the capacity to have that support in a way that's remote if we need to as well. So we're still working through that effort. And again, we were getting ready to roll out some training sessions for all 7 of the regions and the central office. But that's all the updates I have today. And thank you.
Thank you. Any closing comments from committee members? I'll just say that I continue to serve as your ex officio representative on the Sedimentation Control Commission. And one of the things that I continue to advocate for and encourage is communication and improvements between DMLR and DWR, so that if there are erosion issues that are threatening nearby streams, that DWR is notified as quickly as possible. I know that Division Director Wren is taking some steps that are very technically sound, and I think that will make a lot of improvements. So thank you for the opportunity I have to serve on that commission as well as this. If there are no other comments today, we'll look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow in the EMC meeting, and our next meeting will be in July at our regularly scheduled time and date. So if there are no other comments, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.